Looks like I've got the graveyard shift. So thanks, Alex, for the introduction. Yeah, so about the Himalayas, there's this place called Ladakh, which is a high altitude desert where the average altitude is about 10 to 12,000 feet. So yeah, it's a beautiful place. I don't know if I have any Indian friends over here, but everyone knows about Ladakh, and it's a popular place to go motorcycling. Come speak to me at the kiosk. Maybe I can tell you more about my experiences there. But it is a nice experience, and it's a popular holiday activity in India. So returns reconciliation. Actually, I see a few familiar faces from people who visited me at the kiosk yesterday, and this is the topic of the demo. So today's presentation covers more at a conceptual level about returns in the DSCSA lifecycle, issues that may arise in the supply chain and what results in a return, and how you might process that using TraceLink's application stack back to the supplier. But there's a proof of concept demo available. Some of you may have seen that, but if you come by in the kiosk, I'd be happy to walk you through how that plays out using TraceLink stack as well. So just an overview of what we're going to cover, right? Based on our discussions with buyers and sellers, we basically see a two-party procure-to-pay interaction where a demand is generated, and based on that, the buyer essentially issues a purchase order to the seller. And what we're basically looking at is the shipment carries with it the EPCIS file and the electronic information of the serial numbers that are sent along with the shipment. John and Christine covered specifically what are the compliance exceptions or categories or deviations that might occur in this shipment and receipt process. This is a summarized view of what those incident types are. Some of these result in a need to return product back to the supplier. Most commonly, damaged product, overages, short-dated, incorrect product. The way we've observed our customers typically processing returns is having dedicated staff members, first of all, to identify at receiving from the EPCIS file and from the products that they're being physically examined, which are the ones that fall under the incident. Let's assume an overage has occurred. Which are the serial numbers that need to be returned, which is typically a manual process. If you have X number of lots in a shipment, how do you physically come to the conclusion which products are the overage? Which serial numbers are the ones that you need to take to the side, quarantine them, go through your due diligence, and identify that they're required for return. So once that's done, the suppliers typically mandate the list of serial numbers to be sent back to them. And there's a two-party collaboration that happens to come to the conclusion that a return is required. At this point, the buyer's teams typically log into the supplier's portal, register all the details, create a return with all the serial numbers in, and there's no audit on their side. All of the information is on emails, and the supplier asks for a proof of purchase. How does the supplier make sure that the products that are shipped were actually shipped by them? One of the common reasons or the common issues that we see in this process is the supplier gets a return which they actually didn't sell to this buyer, which again is a compliance violation. So this whole person-to-person interaction, or the collaboration between the buyer and seller, involves finding the root cause of the issue, identifying products that need to be returned, making sure they're purchased by the buyer bought them from the correct seller, identifying, making sure the paper trail is in order with the proof of purchase, providing the right clarification before you can take it to your shipping dock and have the products identified for return. All of this process is manually handled in most cases today, and it involves multiple iterations, multiple back and forth between the buyer and the seller. A return authorization typically results in a credit note being issued, which is basically a reflection on the accounts to adjust the products that are being returned. So as I said, there are two parts here, the business to business aspect, which is the B2B transactions, the purchase orders, ASN, invoice, EPCIS, and also the return authorization. And then the person to person or the collaborative aspect, which today takes place through offline means like email, picking up the phone, where there's no audit, there's no paper trail to back that process up. So what we've heard, typical problems during this process, we've tried to classify it between buyers and sellers. The buyer in the receiving process uses a solution to scan, and typically they're sampling. They might not be scanning all the serial numbers at the receiving dock. They might be sampling a subset of the serial numbers of the products that they receive. So how do they come to identify the issue, discover that there is a problem, and then identify the serial numbers that actually need to be returned is a problem that we've heard from our buyers. Another challenge that we've heard is they just want to be able to see the products that they already scanned during the receiving process and identify them because there is a paper trail from the receiving. So you need to, there's a lot of duplicative data entry, which I think John and Christine also mentioned in their sessions, that there's a lot of duplicative data entry throughout this process. So since the electronic paper trail is available from EPCIS, there isn't a need to do that. Typical seller challenges, they want to make sure that the products that they get back, if it's saleable returns, it's the products that they invoiced the customer for. So the proof of purchase and validation happens up front before the products are returned back to them. If that doesn't happen once the products are received back, they typically spend a lot of time in quarantine because the sellers doing a verification on their end to make sure that the serial numbers were indeed sold by them before they can be added back to inventory. So where does that leave us? There's a lot of back and forth to validate this return eligibility. Staff time is spent chasing all the paper trail, the invoices, and the EPCIS to make sure that the product that they want to return is validated, and there's a lot of staff time spent in collaborating around that with the seller. There's no centralized audit trail of this, and there's a lot of manual workflows in this process that increase overall risk. The seller wants the two-way handshake to happen before upfront, before a returns process to them, and not doing that results in a higher cost on their end as well. When they receive product, they end up spending time doing the validation, which results in higher risk. Quick look at the consequences of this. Rejected returns result in lost credit, and that's a financial loss. We spoke about the compliance risk, and overall there's an increased cost in manually managing this through staff hours. Where do we want to go? We want to go with automation, upfront validation, reduced staff time, and increased operational efficiency, fostering stronger relationships between the trade partners. What capabilities do we need to get there? As I said, since you have the EPCIS file, which contains a list of serial numbers, that can serve as the initiation point. Using products when you're scanning in the warehouse, when you're receiving them, and that can serve as the entry point to identify issues upfront and cascade that down through all these electronic transactions and people-to-people interactions through TraceLink's applications, which we'll see in a minute. And since you have the purchase order, the invoice, you can provide that two-way handshake between these documents before you're actually reaching out to the supplier, and that's the automation piece there. So how can TraceLink actually enable doing this, right? This is a view of the visualization of the people-to-people and the business-to-business processes using the POET and Mint applications. So once the incident is discovered, there are various means of using the POET application to actually notify the seller, continuing using the existing stacks that the buyer and seller are using. You could send emails or integrate between the ERP systems that are in place to create the DSCSA compliance exception, send out notifications to the seller in the format that they wish to receive it in, make sure that the collaboration happens and is electronically logged and audited, thus making sure that the collaboration that used to happen over emails is there's a data record that can be queried and there's a paper trail leading back to all of the interactions that happened. The collaboration that happens between the buyer and seller over emails gets logged in POET, gets auto-updated. All you need to do is make sure that the emails are sent to POET and it's translating all of that, and then in turn replying back to both the parties. In terms of a return, once the buyer accepts that there indeed needs to be a return made, this process can be initiated via POET. So while during receiving, with the receipt of the EPCIS file, you're in a position to identify at that point, because you have the receiving solution and you're able to identify serial numbers that may be flagged, which weren't part of the file. Once that happens, all those serial numbers or all the data from there is cascaded down through these people-to-people and business-to-business processes, and the applications themselves are able to communicate with each other, make sure that the seller and buyer are always updated, make sure they consume the responses from these two parties, and then follow through with the credit note or the account adjustment. Again, calling out the business-to-business and the person-to-person aspects involved in this transaction. So to summarize, essentially, a manual process is being followed today, and what POET and Mint applications can do is essentially digitize that and automate that, because TraceLink receives the electronic information high up in the process during receiving, make sure the identification happens over there and cascades that through all the other applications. So any questions? All right. To see a demo of how this works using POET and Mint, make sure that you visit me on the solution kiosk number 10. Let's just make sure that we see a view of how all of this comes together. Again, a different view of the business-to-business transactions with the PO, acknowledgement, ASN, and invoice, which is upfront, going through with the integrate once value add that Mint provides, and the compliance stack with product track, SIT, and SOM that's used to exchange the EPCIS, the POET applications used to exchange DSCSA compliance exceptions, and then Mint again is used to do the B2B transactions. And all of this, all of the applications talk to each other and they're reportable, so you're able to either leverage out-of-the-box reports and dashboards or create your own visualizations to draw metrics between all these different processes. All right, so that's all I had. Thank you.